Today is not a tutorial, it's a warning label. We're running through 10 of the dumbest Christmas deaths ever. Real people, real disasters, to show exactly how fast festive turns fatal when booze, ego, and holiday props team up. Laugh, learn, and absolutely do not copy any of this. 1. The human Christmas tree. Let's set the scene. It's December 24th, 11:45 p.m., a time when the collective IQ of the human race takes a nosedive in favor of liquid courage, and we find ourselves in the damp, unfinished basement of a fraternity house in Ohio that smelled entirely of stale beer and bad life choices. This was the natural habitat of Gary, a 22-year-old legend whose confidence was so high it practically needed its own zip code, while his understanding of electrical engineering was roughly equivalent to that of a golden retriever. Gary was the kind of guy who looked at a high-voltage warning sign and saw it as a challenge to his masculinity rather than a threat to his existence. On this particular festive evening, Gary had decided that the party was lacking a certain je ne sais quoi, and that the solution was to turn himself into the main attraction. His plan? To become the world's first living, breathing, self-powered Christmas tree. Now, if Gary had used modern battery-operated LED fairy lights, the kind that are cool to the touch and operate on the same voltage as a TV remote, he might have survived with nothing more than a bruised ego and some questionable photos on Instagram. But Gary was a purist. He went digging in the garage and unearthed a tangled nest of vintage 1980s outdoor Christmas lights, the big, thumb-sized incandescent bulbs that heat up like miniature reactor cores and draw enough current to dim the lights in the entire neighborhood. These were 220-volt heavy-duty exterior strings, with insulation so old and frayed it looked like it had been chewed on by a colony of meth-addicted rats. With the help of his friends, who, it must be noted, are accessories to stupidity if not legally liable, Gary stripped off his shirt, revealing a torso that was about to become a conducting experiment. They wrapped the heavy, prickly wires tightly around his bare chest, back, and arms, securing the death trap with layer upon layer of silver duct tape. Here is where the biology lesson kicks in, a lesson Gary definitely skipped. The basement was sweltering, the adrenaline was pumping, and Gary was encased in plastic tape and hot glass. Naturally, he began to sweat profusely. Pure water is an insulator, but human sweat is salty, mineral-rich, and essentially nature's favorite electrolyte. Gary had effectively turned his skin into a highly conductive, wet wetsuit, priming his body to become the path of least resistance. As the crowd chanted, "Light him up," feeding the ego that would ultimately kill him, Gary grabbed the plug. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pause to think, hey, maybe mixing exposed mains voltage with saline solution on my chest is a bad idea. No, he shouted, "Merry Christmas, you filthy animals," and jammed the plug into the wall socket with the enthusiasm of a man signing his own death warrant. The result was less festive glow and more electric chair. The 220 volts didn't just illuminate the bulbs. The current found the fraying wires, jumped into his sweat-soaked skin, and surged directly across his chest cavity. The human Christmas tree lit up for exactly 0.4 seconds before the massive electrical discharge seized every muscle in his torso and stopped his heart with the precision of a sniper. He didn't even have time to scream. He just went rigid, vibrating at 60 hertz before collapsing in a heap of sparks, smoke, and the smell of ozone. The breaker eventually tripped, but gravity and cardiac arrest had already done their work. In the end, Gary achieved his goal of being the brightest light in the room, but he paid for the illumination with a one-way ticket to the morgue, leaving the police to file the most ridiculous accident report of the year under death by decoration. 2. The chimney infiltration. We are all fed the childhood propaganda that a morbidly obese man in a velvet suit can magically compress his skeletal structure to slide down millions of chimneys in a single night, delivering joy without suffering a single abrasion. Most of us grow up, learn about physics, and realize this is impossible. Then there was Kevin, a 28-year-old romantic from Oregon whose grip on reality was looser than the belt of the Santa he idolized. Kevin wanted to propose to his girlfriend in the most spectacular way possible, and somewhere in the festive short-circuiting of his brain, he decided that walking through the front door like a normal human being was simply too boring. No. Kevin decided he would execute a Santa Claus entry, descending through the chimney of her 1920s craftsman bungalow to emerge from the hearth, ring in hand, soot on his cheeks, like a chimney sweep Prince Charming. It was a plan that ignored every single tenet of architecture and biology. Kevin waited until 3 a.m., climbed onto the icy roof with the stealth of a ninja who had forgotten to take his medication, and peered into the abyss. Now, let's have a quick lesson on chimney anatomy. They are not smooth, lubricated slides designed for human transport. They are rough, jagged exhaust pipes designed for smoke, and critically, they taper. They get narrower as they go down to improve the draft. Kevin, a man of average build and below average foresight, sat on the edge of the flue, took a deep breath, and hopped in feet first. The first few feet were deceptively easy, gravity doing its work as he scraped past the initial masonry. But then, geometry decided to intervene. As the chimney narrowed toward the smoke shelf, Kevin's descent came to an abrupt, grinding, bone-crunching halt. He didn't just get stuck, he got wedged. His hips passed a point of no return, but his ribcage caught on the narrowing brickwork, pinning his arms above his head in a posture of permanent surrender. He was now suspended in the dark, cold throat of the house, like a cork in a wine bottle that pushes in but won't pull out. Panic, the great enemy of survival, set in immediately. Kevin tried to exhale to squeeze lower, a fatal mistake. When he exhaled, his chest volume decreased, allowing him to slip a fraction of an inch deeper into the wedge. But when he tried to inhale again, the unyielding bricks wouldn't let his ribs expand. This is a horrifying mechanism known as positional asphyxia. Every breath out was a one-way ticket to a tighter squeeze, and every attempt to breathe in was met with a wall of stone. It was a slow, silent vice. Downstairs, his girlfriend was sleeping soundly, completely unaware that her future fiancé was currently dying in her wall. He couldn't scream because he couldn't get enough air to vibrate his vocal cords. He could only make soft, scraping sounds that she likely mistook for a branch on the roof or a settling foundation. Kevin spent his final moments in total darkness, smelling of old soot and regret, realizing too late that the Santa myth omits the part about cartilage compressibility. He was found the next morning not by his girlfriend but by the fire department, who had to dismantle the entire chimney brick by brick to retrieve him. A grim demolition project that left a pile of rubble in the living room, where he had planned to kneel. Kevin wanted to make an entrance she would never forget. And to be fair, he succeeded. She will certainly never forget the time her boyfriend destroyed her fireplace and traumatized the entire neighborhood. 3. The frozen turkey bomb. The culinary world is filled with dangerous tools, mandolins that crave fingertips, pressure cookers that can become shrapnel grenades. But there is no weapon in the suburban arsenal quite as volatile, quite as unforgiving, as the turkey deep fryer. It is a device that demands respect, patience, and a PhD in thermodynamics. 3 things that our protagonist, a 45-year-old father named Brad, completely lacked. Brad was the neighborhood know-it-all, the kind of guy who threw instruction manuals into the trash with a scoff, believing that his dad instincts were superior to the warnings of safety engineers. It was a bitterly cold Christmas afternoon, with temperatures dropping well below freezing, and the wind was howling, threatening to extinguish the flame of his propane burner. A sensible man would have moved the operation to a sheltered patio or built a windbreak. Brad, however, decided to innovate. He dragged the entire setup, the propane tank, the open flame burner, and the pot containing 5 gallons of peanut oil, inside his garage. He closed the garage door to keep the heat in, creating a confined space with poor ventilation. That was fatal error number 1. But Brad was just getting started. The centerpiece of this disaster was the turkey itself. Brad had forgotten to take the bird out of the deep freeze 3 days prior, and staring at the rock-hard 20-pound sphere of poultry ice, he made a calculation that would be his last. Oil gets hot, he reasoned. Ice melts. It'll just cook faster. He was about to test the volatility of phase transition in a way that weapon designers would appreciate. He fired up the burner, bringing the oil to a rolling, bubbling 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, he grabbed the frozen turkey by the plastic hook and lowered it. let's pause for the science. When ice touches 375-degree oil, it doesn't just melt, it sublimates, turning instantly into steam and expanding 700 times in volume. This creates a violent, pressurized explosion of gas from beneath the surface. As Brad dropped the icy bird into the pot, the reaction was immediate. The rapidly expanding steam displaced the oil, sending a geyser of superheated grease erupting over the sides of the pot. Gravity took the oil straight down onto the open flame of the propane burner. The result was not a cooking process, but a fuel air bomb. A massive pillar of fire erupted from the pot, instantly igniting the oil-soaked floor, the walls, and the ceiling of the garage. Because the door was closed, the pressure had nowhere to go but through Brad. He was engulfed in a fireball that rivaled a napalm strike, trapped in a garage that had instantly become a blast furnace. The explosion blew the garage door off its tracks and shook the neighbors' windows, signaling to the entire block that Brad's turkey was done. Firefighters later marveled at the sheer efficiency of the destruction. By sealing himself in with the explosive elements, Brad had created a perfect oven, just not for the turkey. He left behind a charred crater and a very important lesson for the neighborhood. Water and hot oil are enemies, but stupidity and high explosives are best friends. Brad wanted a crispy skin on his bird, but he ended up deep-frying the entire architectural structure of his home, taking himself out in a blaze of greasy, preventable glory. 4. The rocket sled. If Sir Isaac Newton were alive today, he would likely look at our next candidate, grab a stiff drink, and retire from physics entirely. Because Travis, a 26-year-old adrenaline junkie from Vermont, treated Newton's laws not as rules, but as optional guidelines for the boring. It was late on Christmas Eve, the kind of silent, snowy night that inspires poetry in some and fatal stupidity in others. Travis was bored. The local sledding hill, a steep, icy chute usually populated by toddlers in snowsuits, was deserted. Travis looked at his plastic saucer sled, a $10 disc of injection-molded polyethylene designed for gentle glides, and decided it lacked torque. He didn't want a sled ride. He wanted a re-entry vehicle. Travis was the kind of guy who watched Wile E. Coyote strap a rocket to his back and thought, the concept is sound, the execution was just poor. So he retreated to his garage, the laboratory of bad ideas, and retrieved his secret stash, a box of professional-grade mortar fireworks. These weren't your garden variety sparklers. These were heavy-duty, solid-fuel charges designed to launch explosive shells hundreds of feet into the air. Travis, employing the engineering prowess of a caffeinated squirrel, used an entire roll of silver duct tape to strap 6 of these mortars to the back of his plastic saucer. Now, let's pause for a critical physics lesson that Travis missed. Rockets require stabilization fins, a center of gravity, and a steering mechanism. A round plastic saucer has none of these things. It is designed to spin. Travis had essentially built a pinwheel of death. He hauled his infernal machine to the top of Dead Man's Drop, a hill that terminated not in a soft powder field, but at the edge of a dense, unforgiving forest of ancient oaks. He sat in the saucer, wearing a bicycle helmet that offered about as much protection as a Thoughts and Prayers Facebook post, and lit the fuses. He had about 3 seconds to reconsider his life choices. He didn't. When the mortars ignited, the result was not the smooth acceleration of a Tesla. It was the violent, concussive kick of a mule. The sled didn't slide, it vanished. Travis was launched from a standstill to holy crap velocity in under 2 seconds. The thrust was uneven, and because the sled had no rudder, it immediately began to rotate. Travis was no longer steering. He was the meat in a human centrifuge, spinning at 400 RPM while rocketing down an ice sheet at highway speeds. He couldn't see, he couldn't breathe, and he certainly couldn't steer. The smoke from the rockets blinded him, creating a whiteout of his own making. At the bottom of the hill, a 100-year-old oak tree stood its ground. It had survived lightning strikes, blizzards, and pests, but it was about to meet Travis. The collision was mathematically perfect. The sled, acting as a missile, slammed into the trunk with the kinetic energy of a small hatchback. The plastic shattered into shrapnel, the remaining fireworks exploded on impact, and Travis was instantly stopped by the immovable bark. The police report later described the scene as a pyrotechnic forestry incident, noting that while Travis wanted to break the land speed record for plastic saucers, he only succeeded in becoming the world's fastest tree ornament. He died doing what he loved, ignoring friction and accelerating towards a solid object. 5. The Tower of Terror. Laziness is often hailed as the mother of invention, but in the case of Arthur, a 34-year-old accountant with a hatred for manual labor, it was the mother of a broken neck. Arthur lived in a stunning suburban home featuring a great room with 20-foot cathedral ceilings, an architectural feature that looks majestic in photos, but becomes a nightmare when you need to change a light bulb or, in this case, hang a festive sprig of mistletoe. It was Christmas morning, guests were arriving in an hour, and Arthur realized the chandelier was bare. He wanted to hang the mistletoe to facilitate some romantic ambushes, but there was a problem. The 12-foot extension ladder was in the detached garage. The garage was 50 feet away. It was cold outside. Arthur, wearing his fuzzy slippers and a robe, did a quick risk-benefit analysis and decided that walking 50 feet was simply too much to ask of a human being. He decided to innovate using the Jenga principle of structural engineering. He looked at his dining room table, a sturdy mahogany piece, and dragged it to the center of the room. Base established, he likely thought, feeling smug. But it wasn't high enough. So, he grabbed a solid oak dining chair and placed it on top of the table. Still not high enough. Driven by a fatal cocktail of determination and impatience, he looked around for elevation and spotted his wife's collection of vintage encyclopedias. He grabbed a stack of them, ironically including Volume G for gravity and Volume F for fracture, and piled them onto the seat of the chair. Now, let's examine the physics of this death trap. We have a stack of slippery, glossy books sitting on a hard wooden chair, sitting on a wooden table, which was resting on a decorative Persian rug. And underneath that rug, a highly polished, freshly waxed hardwood floor that had the friction coefficient of a hockey rink. It was a frictionless sandwich of doom. Arthur climbed his precarious Tower of Babel, mistletoe in hand, looking like a low-budget circus act. He stood on the books, wobbling like a drunk flamingo, and reached up toward the chandelier. He was inches away. He stretched, and that tiny shift in his center of mass was the signal physics was waiting for. The chair legs shifted on the table, transferring lateral force to the table legs, which pushed against the rug. The rug, having absolutely zero grip on the waxed floor, decided to go for a slide. It was the classic pulling the tablecloth trick, but Arthur was the dishes. The base of his tower shot out from under him with lightning speed. Arthur didn't just fall, he was launched horizontally before gravity reclaimed him. He plummeted 12 feet, rotating in the air, and missed the soft rug entirely. Instead, he crashed neck first onto the raised brick hearth of the fireplace. The snap was audible in the kitchen. He was found minutes later by his wife, lying amidst scattered knowledge and shattered furniture, the mistletoe lying mockingly on his chest. He died trying to hang a plant that symbolizes love, killed by a floor that symbolized a lack of traction. The coroner ruled it accidental, but we all know the truth. Arthur was murdered by his own refusal to put on shoes and walk to the garage. 6. The indoor lumberjack. There is a specific, dangerous form of stubbornness found in suburban fathers who refuse to admit they made a mistake. And this trait was the defining characteristic of Bill, a 45-year-old project manager whose project management skills evidently did not extend to holiday planning. Bill had gone to a cut-your-own-tree farm and, succumbing to a complete lack of spatial awareness, chopped down a 14-foot Douglas fir for his home, which possessed standard 8-foot ceilings. After wrestling the beast through the front door, knocking over a lamp, and covering the foyer in needles, he hoisted it up. The result was comedic. The top 6 feet of the tree smashed against the ceiling, bending over like a depressed wizard's hat. His wife, the voice of reason in this partnership, suggested the logical solution. Take it back outside and saw the trunk off. Bill, however, was already in his flannel pajamas, nursing a scotch and watching football. "I'm not dragging this thing back out into the snow," he declared, his eyes gleaming with a terrible, lazy idea. "I'll just trim the top right here." He marched to the garage and returned not with a handsaw, but with his gas-powered 18-inch chainsaw, a tool designed for felling timber in open forests, not for cosmetic pruning next to the drapes. He placed a wobbly kitchen stool next to the tree. Let's assess the hazard profile. We have a running two-stroke combustion engine in a closed living room, a man in slippery cotton socks standing on a stool, and a spinning chain of razor-sharp teeth inches from the drywall. Bill yanked the starter cord. The chainsaw roared to life, filling the cozy living room with the deafening sound of 110 decibels and a thick cloud of blue exhaust smoke. The smell of unburnt hydrocarbons instantly overpowered the scent of pine. Bill climbed the stool, revving the engine like he was auditioning for a horror movie remake. He reached up, holding the heavy saw above his head, a violation of every safety manual ever written, to slice the bent treetop. Two things happened simultaneously. First, the exhaust fumes venting directly into his face in the stagnant indoor air gave him an immediate hit of carbon monoxide dizziness. Second, as the saw bit into the springy bent wood, it kicked back. The tip of the bar hit a knot, and the laws of physics dictated that the saw must rotate violently upward and backward. The torque threw the dizzy Bill off balance. His sock-clad foot slipped on the smooth wooden stool. He fell backward, but his grip on the throttle tightened in a panic reflex. The chainsaw, still screaming at full RPM, followed gravity down with him. It didn't land on the floor, it landed on Bill, specifically across his neck and collarbone. The mess was instant and catastrophic. The tree stood tall and partially trimmed, a silent witness to the carnage, while Bill lay on the carpet, having successfully removed himself from the census, rather than the tree tip. He wanted the perfect tree without the effort, and he ended up as a cautionary tale about why internal combustion engines and interior decorating are mutually exclusive concepts. 7. The real-life Rudolph. There is a very specific, very dangerous delusion that afflicts urban dwellers when they enter the wilderness. A condition I like to call the Disney Princess Syndrome, where otherwise rational adults convince themselves that wild animals are just fuzzy, unpaid actors waiting for a hug. This brings us to Dylan, a 29-year-old marketing executive from Chicago, whose understanding of zoology was derived entirely from watching cartoons where bears sing jazz. Dylan was attending a high-end winter retreat in the Rocky Mountains, and on Christmas Eve, he had consumed a quantity of spiked eggnog that would have anesthetized a Clydesdale. Around midnight, Dylan looked out the cabin window and spotted a massive bull elk standing at the edge of the forest, breath steaming in the moonlight. Now, a sober person, or anyone with a survival instinct stronger than a moth's, sees a 700-pound beast with spear-tipped bone chandeliers growing out of its head and thinks, "I should lock the door." Dylan, however, saw a content creation opportunity that would make him a legend on TikTok. He turned to his equally intoxicated friends and slurred the famous last words of the suburban idiot. "Watch this, I'm gonna make him Rudolph." He grabbed a red foam clown nose from a pile of party favors and stumbled out into the freezing night, wearing only a hideous Santa's Little Helper sweater and designer jeans. His friends, acting as the grim documentation crew, pulled out their phones and cheered him on from the safety of the porch. Dylan approached the elk, cooing at it with the same tone one would use for a golden retriever puppy. "Here, boy, hold still. Daddy's got a nose for you," he whispered, extending the red foam ball toward the animal's snout. Let's pause for a biology reality check. Bull elk in winter are testosterone-fueled tanks. They are hungry, irritable, and territorially aggressive. They do not know who Santa is, and they certainly do not want to be cosplayed. As Dylan got within arm's reach, invading the animal's personal space with the confidence of a drunk toddler, the elk decided it had had enough of this festive harassment. It didn't run away, it engaged. The elk reared up on its hind legs, towering over Dylan like a hairy skyscraper. Its front hooves, which are essentially sledgehammers made of keratin, flashed in the moonlight. Dylan, whose reaction time was currently lagging by about 3 seconds, didn't even have time to drop the clown nose. The first blow caught him square in the chest, shattering his ribs with the acoustic crunch of stepping on a bag of tortilla chips. The force threw him back into a snowbank, but the elk, viewing the red sweater as a challenge, wasn't done. It proceeded to trample him with a thoroughness that was almost professional, treating Dylan not as a human, but as a predator that needed to be neutralized. By the time his friends stopped laughing and realized that the screaming wasn't part of the joke, the elk had finished its work and trotted off into the darkness, unadorned. Dylan was left as a flat red stain in the driveway, a grim reminder that nature doesn't care about your Instagram following. He wanted to bring a fairy tale to life, but he forgot that in the original fairy tales, people usually get stomped by woodland creatures. He died of massive blunt force trauma, proving that while you can lead a human to nature, you can't make him think. 8. The chimney. Cleaner. Home maintenance is a drag, especially during the holidays when the pressure to have a perfect home turns average men into desperate corner-cutting maniacs. Enter Jerry, a 50-year-old DIY enthusiast whose toolkit consisted entirely of duct tape, WD-40, and unearned confidence. It was 2 hours before his annual Christmas Eve bash, and Jerry faced a crisis. His fireplace was hopelessly clogged with years of accumulated soot. Every time he tried to light a fire, smoke backed up into the living room, threatening to ruin the ambiance. A normal, rational human being would call a chimney sweep or perhaps buy one of those chemical cleaning logs. Jerry, however, was a man of action, a man who believed that any problem could be solved with enough force. He remembered a trick his grandfather allegedly used back in the old country to blast soot out of a chimney. Without verifying the safety, physics, or even the reality of this memory, Jerry went to his reloading bench in the garage. He took a canister of black powder, the kind used for antique muskets, and poured a generous pile into a paper lunch bag. A little boom to shake it loose, he reasoned to himself, feeling like a genius. But Jerry wasn't satisfied with just powder. He wanted to ensure ignition. So, in a move that would make a bomb squad technician weep, he added a cup of gasoline to the bag. He had essentially built a high-yield improvised explosive device, IED, in his living room. He placed the soaking wet bag of death in the fireplace, lit a long fuse, and stepped back, about 3 feet. He expected a whoosh that would push the soot up and out into the night sky. Physics, however, had a different plan. When the powder and gas ignited, they created a massive, instantaneous expansion of hot gas. Now, because the chimney was clogged, which was the whole reason for this exercise, the gas couldn't go up. It was a plugged pipe. The pressure had to go somewhere, and it chose the path of least resistance, out into the room. The explosion was deafening, a sonic boom trapped in a 12x12 living room. The blast wave didn't just blow smoke, it blew the entire heavy brick facade of the fireplace outward. A wall of masonry, weighing several hundred pounds, was launched horizontally at Jerry like an oversized shotgun blast. He was standing right there, drink in hand, wearing a smug grin that was instantly erased by a flying wall of bricks. The force of the blast crushed him instantly against his coffee table, burying him under a pile of rubble, soot, and his own bad decisions. The guests arrived an hour later to find the front door unlocked, the house filled with smoke, and Jerry nowhere to be found, until they noticed the boots sticking out from under the demolished hearth. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma due to structural stupidity. Jerry wanted a roaring fire. He got a bomb. He cleared the chimney all right, by removing it from the house entirely, along with his own place in the gene pool. 9. The icicle guillotine. There is something strangely mesmerizing about a giant icicle. It glimmers in the sun, a beautiful crystalline dagger of nature. Most people admire them from a distance, or, if they are worried about safety, knock them down from a window. Then there was Frank. Frank was a 38-year-old suburban perfectionist, the kind of guy who measured his lawn grass with a ruler. He was hanging Christmas lights on his eaves when he spotted the big one, a massive, 6-foot-long shard of ice hanging directly over the front porch. It was thick as a tree trunk, sharp as a spear, and it offended Frank's sense of symmetry. It had to go. Now, the intelligent way to remove a 50-pound ice spear is to stand to the side and hit it, or perhaps throw a basketball at it from the lawn. Frank, however, was not a student of geometry or basic survival tactics. He stood on his porch directly underneath the behemoth, looking straight up at it like a turkey staring at rain. He armed himself with a push broom, holding it like a jouster. "I'll just give it a little tap and catch it," he perhaps thought, vastly overestimating his own reflexes and underestimating the weight of water. He raised the broom handle straight up, poking at the base of the ice where it met the gutter. He jostled it. Nothing. He poked harder. Still nothing. Frustrated by the ice's stubbornness, Frank gave a mighty, two-handed thrust upward, putting his full back into it. The vibration was enough. The bond broke. The icicle, weighing as much as a large dog but shaped like a medieval javelin, detached instantly. Gravity, which is remarkably consistent, takes about 1 second to accelerate an object 16 feet. Frank didn't even have time to blink. He was looking up, mouth open, broom in hand, when the ice came down. The tip of the icicle caught him squarely in the chest, piercing his sternum and heart with the ease of a hot knife through butter. But the insult didn't stop there. The sheer weight of the ice crushed him to the deck, pinning him like a biological specimen in a display case. He was found 20 minutes later by his wife, who came out to ask why the lights weren't up yet, only to discover Frank pinned to the porch by a melting murder weapon. By the time the paramedics arrived, the evidence was slowly turning into a puddle of water, washing away the scene of the crime. Frank had been killed by the weather, aided and abetted by his own disastrous positioning. It was a freak accident, sure, but one that required a special kind of lack of situational awareness to achieve. He fought the ice, and the ice won, delivering a cold, hard lesson on why you never stand directly under a falling object, especially when you are the one actively poking it with a stick. 10. The gift-wrapped suffocation. We end our festive list with a story of love, dedication, and a complete misunderstanding of mammalian respiratory biology. Meet Steve, a 25-year-old prankster who loved big reveals and hated subtlety. For his first Christmas with his live-in girlfriend, he decided to give her the ultimate gift, himself. But Steve wasn't just going to jump out from behind the sofa like a common amateur. No, he obtained a massive refrigerator box, wrapped it beautifully in shiny red paper, and placed it under the tree. His plan was to hide inside the box, wait for her to come home, and then burst out shouting, "Surprise!" It sounds cute in a romantic comedy. In reality, it was a death trap. Steve climbed into the box at 4:40 p.m., knowing she would be home by 5 on. To ensure the surprise wasn't ruined by a loose flap, he taped the box shut from the inside using heavy-duty industrial packing tape. He did a thorough job, sealing every seam and corner to make the box look like a perfect solid cube. He sat in the dark, giggling to himself, waiting for the front door to open. But 5:00 p.m. came and went. His girlfriend got stuck in gridlock holiday traffic. Then she stopped for groceries. Then she stopped for gas. Steve, cozy in his box, started to feel drowsy. He didn't realize that in his zeal to seal the box, he had created a nearly airtight chamber. Cardboard is porous, but layers of glossy wrapping paper and industrial tape are not. He was slowly consuming the limited oxygen in the box and replacing it with carbon dioxide. This wasn't a nap. It was carbon dioxide narcosis. The CO2 levels rose, lulling him into a deeper, unshakable sleep, suppressing his urge to breathe. By the time his girlfriend walked in the door at 6:45 p.m., Steve wasn't waiting. He was gone. She saw the giant gift, squealed with delight, and, thinking it was a piece of furniture, decided to leave the big one for last. She made dinner, watched a Christmas movie, and finally, around 9:30 p.m., approached the box. She tore off the paper, expecting a new armchair. Instead, she cut the tape to find her boyfriend curled up in the fetal position, blue, cold, and unresponsive. He had suffocated in a box of his own making, killed by his commitment to the bit. The police had to photograph the scene. A grown man dead inside a cardboard coffin wrapped in Happy Holidays paper. It was a tragic, silent end to a prank that required just one air hole to be successful. Steve proved that it is indeed the thought that counts, but unfortunately, he forgot to think about the fact that human beings need oxygen to survive. He gave his life for a punchline that no one ever got to hear, leaving his girlfriend with a traumatic memory that no return policy can ever fix. Be honest. Which of these 10 deaths is uncomfortably close to something you or your family has actually tried? Drop the number, tell the story, and I'll pin the most insane one. Smash like, hit subscribe, and remember, your job is to watch Darwin Awards, not audition for them.